The everyday world that we're familiar with around us is not the reality of most of our planet. You often hear that we live on a blue planet, it's an ocean planet, but what we don't so often hear, I think, is that it's a deep ocean planet relative to our human scale. More than 60% of our world is covered by water that's more than a kilometre deep. And that's the absolute limit reached by the sun's rays as they're quenched by seawater. So the reality of our world is that it's a deep ocean world, it's a dark, deep ocean world, and I'm very pleased that my day job, if you like, is to explore it and to try to understand the lives of its inhabitants. And that involves, inevitably, so many of the aspects, the definitions of wonder that we heard about at the start of today. Not least, when we're on the ocean floor, its terrain looks so alien to us. So this is a rocky bit of terrain. This is the part of the mid-ocean ridge, our planet's geological backbone, something we had no conception really existed in its full extent until just 40, 50 years ago, really. It's very, very rugged. It doesn't look that much like mountain sort of ranges on land, that kind of thing. There's also the vast sedimented abyssal plains. They look so alien to us because they're shaped by completely different processes to the ones we're familiar with that shape the countryside around us. You know, there's no rain, there's no rivers, there weren't ice ages with ice sheets, you know, scouring out valleys, that kind of thing here. So, you know, that certainly strikes us when we're exploring the ocean floor. And then there's the life, which is what we're here to talk about in this session. You probably see in lots of documentaries, it is the realm of the bizarre to us. Again, things that seem alien. Lots and lots of examples. Here's one of my personal favorites. This is a new species that we saw for the first time in 2010, about a mile deep in a seafloor crater in the Antarctic. And this is a worm. It looks very different to the worms we're familiar with. And it's part of a group of worms which, again, we had no idea they existed just 15 years ago. In fact, the first one was described. We now know 20 species. This was a new species we found in 2010. The group has this wonderful name, the bone-eating zombie worms. So why does it have that bizarre name? It has a bizarre lifestyle. This mass at the bottom that you can see here, that's a sort of a branching network of roots that this worm grows, and it lives, we found this on the skeleton of a minke whale at the bottom of the ocean, and it makes its living thanks to bacteria that live among those roots, digesting the actual bone to make a living. Okay, so that's how it overcomes the challenge of finding food. What about finding a mate, reproduction, the other great challenge of life? Again, completely bizarre. This is a female. The males you struggle to see without a microscope. In comparison, they're adult sized, they are tiny, they have little hooks, and they hook onto the female. They live in the same tube, mucus sheath, as this thing grows into the bone. And yeah, very, very bizarre lifestyle. They're almost sort of parasites on the female. That's the challenge of finding a mate in the dark depths. So, again, very bizarre, very strange. We think, isn't that wonderful? And yet, when we come back, I think, from these deep ocean journeys, I hope we bring some of that with us. So now I go out walking my dog and I see something like this. And I'll stop and I'll have a look at it and think, you know, if I came across that at the bottom of the ocean, I'd think it was one of those bizarre, amazing life forms we've almost come to expect in the deep ocean. Look at this organism. Here we have something, it's nourished by the sun's rays, it grows, it then has this challenge of how does it propagate, how does it spread so that other adult forms grow elsewhere. It develops these incredible structures to be carried by the wind, to carry its propagules. If we saw that in the deep ocean, we would be astounded by it. We would put it up there with the bone-eating zombie worms, the anglerfish, all these other wonders of the deep. And yet, we brush past it every day. We even dismiss it as a weed. So we are often astounded in our deep ocean explorations by the scenes of life that we encounter. This one here, this is an amazing riot of life. This is 2,400 meters deep near Antarctica, And this is around hot springs on the ocean floor, which is the main focus of my study. And all of the species you see here, new to science, none of them seen before 2009 when we started exploring this area. And each of them has these incredible adaptations to this environment and those challenges of life that I mentioned. And if you'd like, there are some postcards I've left in the foyer of this scene. You're very welcome to take away as a memento of it. So we're astounded by this. Here's life nourished ultimately by dissolved minerals gushing out of a hot spring on the ocean floor. Elsewhere in the deep ocean, scenes like this astound us. These are glass sponges, skeletons made of silicious material, literally like glass. And here they are, this meadow, nourished by this soft, perpetual rain of organic particles from the sunlit world far above. Again, we're astounded by this. And yet, I go walking the dog and I see scenes like this. And you think, isn't this equally incredible? Just look at how this is flourishing, this rain of photons on the surface of the planet. And we see these events, and this doesn't last very long. It's part of our dynamic living world. So we go into the deep ocean. We experience all these different forms of wonder, particularly at the life that's down there. And I hope we bring some of that back with us or can do that, bring it back into the everyday. And I think that's important because I've seen some of, I think, the best and the worst of humanity on voyages into the deep ocean. In terms of the worst, I found our rubbish on the ocean floor in places before our eyes have even ever got there to see it. In terms of the best, I've been on a ships of hard-bitten scientists, united in moments of wonder at what they're seeing as we're exploring these parts of our planet for the first time. Hard-bitten scientists, hardly a dry eye among them during these moments. Doesn't matter what else we disagree about, we share in that experience. And I think that's very important because I think if we nourish that sense of wonder at everything around us, I think that helps to inform the choices we make in our everyday lives. That hopefully gives us hope for our future as a species. Thank you very much.
I was interested in the fact that the dive that you talk about, going down to 5K, in fact, it's come to my attention that we've only really explored a tiny percentage of 3% or something.
It kind of depends what you mean by explored. If you mean mapped, and maps are so utterly fascinating, but we have a map of 100% of the ocean floor. It's 100% explored, just only to a level of detail of 5 kilometers. And we still find things with other techniques that are smaller than 5 kilometers, like that crater in the Antarctic that the zombie worm came from. If you mean seen by human eyes, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent. It's probably 1/200th of 1% seen by human eyes of the deep ocean floor. And then just glimpsed once. Does that mean explored? Again, where I walk my dog, it's very different seasons, different species flourishing at different times of the year. Should I have considered explored after one walk in one season? It's interesting because explored to me doesn't have an end. It begins by making a map, definitely, but it doesn't have an end on our dynamic world.
And some of what you were seeing on one of those slides was actually deep sea vents, weren't they?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So these are hot springs, a bit like the geysers of Yellowstone, but on the ocean floor. And then the species that are adapted to thrive around them, they form island-like colonies. And then it's some distance to the next set of deep sea vents. If you ever visit Iceland, you actually see these steam plumes from these sets of hot springs down the Rift Valley. That's exactly what it's like on the ocean floor, and it's some distance.
How far?
It can be hundreds of kilometres. It can be tens of kilometres. It depends what the geology of the Earth's crust underneath is doing. But it's too far for the adult animals that thrive around that set of vents to reach the next set of vents, and the vents don't last forever.
Yeah.
Tens of years in some cases, thousands of years in other cases, but ultimately each individual colony is ephemeral. And so all those species have this challenge of disperse or ultimately die out, and obviously they've all adapted to meet that challenge. And they do that not by crawling as adult forms, many of them are stuck to rocks, they can't move, but they have larval stages, they have dispersal stages in their life cycles, and that's how they cross this void, this abyss, which to them is adapted, reliant on the vents for energy and so on. That's how they reach the next life-giving oasis, if you like. And I find that fascinating because I wonder about whether that's a sort of an analogy for life in the cosmos. losing it. Sorry, I'm probably.
That's right. So
moving
go on.
that.
How does that?
So here we are in a planetary system. We're utterly dependent on ourselves for the sun for energy, and we need gravity and matter and all the things we have on this ball of rock. We're not adapted to living away from those conditions. The next planetary system that could sustain life like ours is a relatively vast distance, and it's inhospitable to us in our current form, if you like. And quite a few folk have said we face the challenge of disperse or die out. Stephen Hawking, I think only this week, was saying we've got 1,000 years to colonize somewhere else or we're doomed. How does nature do that? Nature doesn't transport the adult forms. Nature comes up with vehicles to carry the instructions to grow new adult forms elsewhere. So the sort of sci-fi that I quite like is things like A for Andromeda. It's this idea. But I think it goes far beyond that, because to me, I think these arguments about us dispersing as a species kind of missed the point. We all ultimately, at some point in our individual lives, accept our individual mortality. And we think, well, how do we live on beyond our physical lifespan? It's about the interactions, the relationships we have. It's about bridging, the gap to this planet of the other people that Michelle was talking about earlier. And we do that by communicating, by sharing ideas, experiences with people. So, is that not the future for us as a species? Should we not accept our physical mortality as a species on this ephemeral oasis that we have? We've only got 1 billion years, incidentally, before the sun becomes so bright that it boils away all the oceans, and that'll be it for life on Earth, I think, certainly as we understand it. Given that, what makes us human is not, I don't think, our sequence of letters in our genetic code. It's exactly what Michelle was talking about with Ludwig's wonderful performance earlier. It's this other spirit that enters us. And I think we could reflect on what it means to be human. What is humanity? What are the experiences, the things we've learned? What is the culture we would like to share with life elsewhere in the cosmos? Is that not how we should think about persisting? And if we do that and accept our mortality as a species, then I think we focus on the relationships we have on this planet.
Brilliant.